Hello, and welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is writer, poet Miguel Eichelberger. We'll be talking to him about himself and his new book of poems, Everything Is. Miguel, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate this.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I appreciate you making the time to be here today. So, before we get to talking to Miguel about his work and himself, we always like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched lately. I'll go first just to give Miguel some time to gather his thoughts. So, two items on the watching front. It's been in the news a bit lately. I went and really enjoyed Supergirl. I liked it a lot. I would give it a solid B, maybe just above a B minus. The only thing I didn't really care about too much was I thought the villain was a little too generic.
Mm,
Nothing really remarkable, but I thought Millie Alcock did a fantastic job in the title role, and I think Jason Momoa definitely was born to play Lobo much more than he was born to
yeah.
play Aquaman. I liked it. It was a lot of fun. It was a great comic book movie. I don't really understand what all the hate is coming from, but for the most part, I had a good time. I liked it a lot, and the other thing is that my wife and I we watched the first episode a couple of weeks ago of Widow's Bay, which is on Apple
Mm,
TV, and I was under the impression that it was like this combination horror comedy. And the first episode left me kind of cold. I didn't really see much comedy
mhm.
in it. Definitely had the horror and thriller elements to it. But a lot of people I've talked to who have said, no, no, you have to give it a chance. Just watch it. So we watched episodes two, three, and four. And yes, the comedy definitely came more into play, which I was really grateful for. But they also did a really good job with the horror elements. And I didn't realize this. My wife explained it to me like after episode two or three, that it's more of a monster of the week type of horror show. And if you watch it with that frame of mind, and it is a long, extended linear story. So we're about almost halfway through, but really enjoying it. I think it definitely got better as it went along. So I'm glad we stuck with it. So if you like, I guess more horror with comedic elements rather than straight up 50-50 split, then I think you'd really enjoy Widow's Bay. That is it for me. So I will toss it over to Miguel. What have you been enjoying or not enjoying, reading or watching?
It's funny. My current enjoyment comes from something I didn't enjoy, which is
Oh.
I didn't enjoy hearing that Amazon's new Stargate series was then canceled before it even got off the ground. That bummed me out. So I went back to watch Stargate Atlantis again, and I just adore everything they're doing there. The idea that it's us now finding technology out in the universe and trying to figure it out as we go. And yeah, I just find it grounded. I find it hilarious. I find it excellent sci-fi as well, like conceptually excellent sci-fi. And that actually brought me to John Scalzi, who I didn't know worked on Stargate Atlantis or Star one of the Stargate series, and
Yeah.
so I've been reading his Old Man War series right now. So yeah.
I was going to say how many I know because I mean I've only seen the original movie. I mean I never got into
Hmm.
the TV shows much. How many series have there been? I remember there was like Stargate SG-1. Were there like one or two others beside that?
Yeah, there was so Stargate SG-1. That was like a little bit before like my time, so to speak. But then my brother got me into Stargate Atlantis, which came right afterwards, and then was connected to a lot of Stargate SG-1. And then they did two seasons of a series called Stargate Universe, and
Okay.
yeah, and I was okay. This is the thing. We were all really psyched, all of us fans, because the like Amazon did something unprecedented, which was let's go back to the actual talent that actually made those hit shows and get them to make another show,
Ah.
right? So like not a reboot, just full on like in that universe, we're gonna do it again. It's however many years later, 15, 20 years later, 20 years later, right? And like let's go. And so of course everybody was really psyched, and then they're like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do it. So that's a bit of a bummer, but yeah.
Okay. Wow. Honestly, I had no idea like the Stargate universe, so, quotes unquotes, was so extensive. I didn't realize that there'd been like several
Yeah.
series over the past, sounds like past
Yeah.
couple of decades even.
Yeah. There's like I don't know how many 150 episodes of TV you can watch or something like that,
Oh
maybe
my
more. I
gosh.
could be wrong. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that is definitely news to me.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that you've got your Stargate recommendations. Let us
Mhm.
talk with Miguel Eichelberger. So what I like to do, Miguel, is I like to read the About the author page, which in your case is near the back of your book. Miguel Eichelberger is a writer, communicator, and joyful mutineer. He received his BA in English at the University of Calgary with concentrations in archaeology and theater. His creative work has appeared in literary magazines and on stages around the world. His most recent publications include Acta Victoriana, Harper Palette,
Valid.
palette. Okay, that's a word I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with.
Mhm.
Rappahannock Review. I got that one right.
Mm.
Literary Review of Canada and Plain Songs Magazine. And his poetry is a feature piece in the Ducktown Poetry Trail in Atlantic City, a collaborative art project between Murphy Writing and the Noyes Museum of Art of Stockton University that brings awareness to issues of social justice. He also has a screenplay option in Ireland. So,
Yeah.
Miguel, let's start off talking a little bit about you and your background.
Mhm.
So, I mean, how did you get your start? I mean, it sounds like you were a writer, for a very long time, almost your entire life. I always like to ask the guests, like, were you a voracious reader as a child, or was writing something you came to a little bit later in life?
No, that was it was an early one for me. I was one of those kids who I think I was like 13 years old, and everybody has that one book. Like you encounter a book, you encounter a story, whatever it is, and you're like, holy crap! Like this is what words can do. You can do this, and so yeah. So when I at 13, I already knew I was like, I'm going to do something in the writing space, and then yeah, I just from there. I got immediately mesmerized by Leonard Cohen when I saw like a music video of his, I think, and
Mhm.
I was very young. And again, I had this like, whoa, like what is he doing lyrically? That is extraordinary, and people should investigate this. So I investigated it, and Calvin and Hobbes too. When I was a kid, like that got me as well.
Sure.
Yeah, and so yeah, so for me, it was just always going to be a part of it, and yeah, voracious reader from a young age. I remember my dad like gave me the Encyclopedia Britannica, just handed me A, and was like, go. So I
Start.
was like, yeah.
That's great. I'm very curious. So a lot of influences, as you say, Leonard Cohen, Calvin and Hobbes, uh,
Mhm.
on your writing. But it sounds like you also kind of, I don't want to say dabbled because that's the wrong word, but you took you wrote in so many different, it sounds like, genres, because I mean you said
Yeah.
it mentions your bio, you have a screenplay option, and this is a book of poems, and
Yeah.
just and all kind of like works in literary reviews. I mean, was there a particular genre that kind of got you in, and then you just had fun exploring all the different options out there?
Yeah, fiction was my like first love, and I remember like I think it was like Clive Cussler like adventure novels and stuff that like really got me into the fiction space and understanding what you could do there. And then I remember having this arrogant idea where I was like I think I was 19 at the time, maybe even 18, right before I went to university, and I was like I'm gonna write a book and I'm gonna be famous. It's gonna be amazing. And I wrote a book. It's not good, and
Mm.
I wrote a book, and I remember actually got like a little bit of attention on when I was submitting it, and the process of that and the editorial process scared the living shit out of me, and I ran in the other direction instead into poetry. Like that's where I like hid in poetry is what I did for, and then only recently, like the last 5 years, did I get back into the fiction space too. So
Sure, sure. I was going to
yeah.
say that you said like this early book, it's not going to see the light of day. I have had poets on before, and a lot of them they started writing poetry like in their preteen to teenage years. And I say, do you have a lot of examples of like cringeworthy teenage poetry that you nobody should ever see again, or that it will never see the light of day type of thing? Is that do you have fall into that category as well?
I have, I would say cringeworthy fiction, like stuff that, like, when you look at it again, you're like, oh, come on, man. Like, you were better than this, weren't you? No, I wasn't. And, but then, like, when I started writing it was in university. I remember going down the English path and I started to get into the poetry space deeper. Nothing like typically cringeworthy, but definitely nothing worthy of any kind of publication at this point, right? It was an idiot groping in the dark, seeing if he could
Mm,
find something. So,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, well, that kind of leads to the question. So, what is it about poetry that you found so appealing and attractive that this is the genre, these are the kinds of things that I want to write?
That it was an interesting question, right? So like you were talking about like when you read the bio there, like archaeology was a big part of my time in university as well. And In archaeology, you also graze on the outskirts of anthropology and also on the outskirts of things like old belief structures and old mythologies and that kind of stuff. And so what really intrigued me there is I'm like, how come most myth is not written in straightforward prose? How come most religious texts are not written in straightforward prose? Why is it always in poetry, right? And then I remember I had a teacher who said it's because it is a translation of something that is so like that we feel so deeply and is intrinsic to us that you there's no there's no common way to translate that into the world, right? So what you're doing is your very best to translate something that is almost untranslatable, and that's why you have to write it in this space because you're not writing about the thing, you're writing around the thing, trying to get people to see themselves in it, whatever it is. And then I remember just in recent, like I would say last decade or so, I heard somebody talk about, like the difference in the limbic system of your brain versus the neocortex. And they're like, the limbic system where we feel everything has no capacity for language. I was like, oh, that's why poetry, like that's why we do that. Because it's our smarter brain, our more evolved brain attempting to translate all of that stuff that we
Hmm.
feel, here. And so yeah, I think it's something what was fascinating about it to me is any human being on the planet, regardless of whether or not you like poetry, you can pick up a book of poetry and you might hate 99% of what you read there, but there'll be one line
Hmm.
that plucks a chord and you're like, oh shit, like this person, like I feel seen in this work that is 500 years old, or I feel seen in this work
Hmm.
that is 10 minutes old. And that was the thing that was always fascinating, is like how many strings can you pluck if you explore this deeply. So
Yeah, I was going to say that's the one thing I noticed while I was reading, a lot of the work in Everything is that there are some things that were easily um, I don't know, easily understandable for me. And there were a few that I
mhm.
had to go back and read them again. Like, okay, maybe I'm just not getting it. And then maybe I get it the second time and realize, okay, maybe. And then I would notice the details within the words, like why did he choose this particular word, or the way this is phrased, and it had like opened a door. It's kind of like more impact, more
Mm.
resonance for me, and I just that was really effective. And I think I could totally relatable to what you said. That you could read 99% of it, and that, or not like 99% of it, but like that one
Yeah.
thing that maybe is the spark that starts something else. Speaking of your book, Everything Is. So
Mm.
what I like to ask the guest is that for screenwriting we have the elevator pitch. Tell me what your story is in five, 1 to 2 sentences. But for books, and especially for a collection of poems, it's a little bit different. So it's the cocktail party pitch. You're at a cocktail party and someone says, "Oh,
Uh,
Miguel, I heard about you. You've got this collection of poems called Everything Is. Tell me more about it." And you say,
I say it is a travel log through grief designed to help people find their way to, because when I sat down with grief, I had nothing. I had no map. I had no idea what the hell to do. I was just like, what am I going to do? I'm like, I'll feel everything and I'll use poetry to translate it and I'll see if there's anything worthwhile to give to anybody else in it.
yeah, I was going to say reading on the back, it talks about it's not just a travel log, but it's also you dealing with grief about the passing of your father,
Yes.
and which
Yeah.
I think is very powerful, and it was particularly resonant for me because both of my parents passed away last year.
Mm,
So a lot of the things in here I could totally relate to, and I was going to say that was this because I've had guests who have used writing as a kind of therapy to get over very
mm.
traumatic experiences. Now, was that how it was for you? Like putting this collection of poems about your father, was it something you felt like felt compelled to do, or you said you were like looking maybe for a way to channel your grief or trying to find some kind of
Mm.
catharsis to get past it? I'm just very intrigued to hear like the origins for the whole collection of poems.
Yeah, the best way I can put it, actually, it's because of my father. Because one of the things that was really special about him as a human being was that he was this consummate scientist about the world. Even though, like, he came up as an engineer and ended up we had a ranch in northern British Columbia in the middle of nowhere, right? So but his whole thing though was always to stare like nakedly at what's in front of you, like whatever's in front of you. Um, be curious, interrogate it, whatever it was. And that included, I remember when he passed away, it reminded me, was when I was very young. I have very vague memories of this. he was actually diagnosed with terminal cancer in 1985 when I was 2 years old. And the doctor told him, like, it's a mortality, a life expectancy of 90%, or no, sorry, mortality rate of 90%. You have a life, like, it's 1 in 10 will survive this. And so he's like, okay, I'll be that one. Like, famously in my family, that's the apocryphal story of him. I don't know if it's apocryphal. He said it actually. And but that was his whole thing was then, and I remember asking him later on in life too, like when I was like 19, 20, I was like, how did you get through that? And he's just like, I was just curious about it. Right. And so when he passed away, and I don't know what your experience was, but my experience was immediately like, okay, I'm numb. Like things don't feel real, right? Nothing
Hmm.
feels real. But when feeling sort of came back, like when when like the circulation came back to the whole system, I was like, all right, I'll be instead curious. I'm gonna feel everything, whatever it is. Anytime I don't care if it's frustration. I don't care if it's love, it's sadness, it's whatever it is, right? I'm gonna feel it all, and I'm going to interrogate it. I'll write it down. And poetry was the closest thing I had to hand, and so I started doing that. And then what I found was over the course of what was effectively a 7 year writing process, like the first iteration of it was 140 poems and like nothing connected, like all completely disjointed. And I gave it to my far better half, who is an extraordinary writer and editor, and she's the reason anything I do is any good. And she brought it down to a manageable, I think it was like 80. And then I started submitting it and it would get shortlisted or whatever it was. And then I would get feedback from like wonderful names in the poetry space. And I would rewrite it and I would rewrite it and I would rewrite it. And I still get so frustrated that it wasn't getting over the line. And then somebody helped me out with that as well. And that was therapeutic actually, because they said, a phrase that I take with me now into all writing, which is instead of trying to show them, let them see. Like instead of trying to show them how special dad was or how special my relationship was with him or how important I think grief is and what a gift it is, right? It's just write the shit and let them see. And so that's why it became this like thin volume you hold in your hands right
Hmm.
now,
Yeah, I
right?
was going to say
And
it's only like what 23, 24 poems total,
yeah,
something like that, and then like some
yeah.
acknowledgments at the end. One of the things I thought was really interesting is that all of the poems are presented in a almost chronological order. And
Yes.
what I was wondering, was that intentional, or was it, you said it was a 7 year process. Was that just, you just like, here, I wrote something here, and like 6 months later, I came up with another one that just happens to fall chronologically after the previous one, and so on and so on.
That's an excellent question because yeah, that's exactly what would happen, right? Like because it is a I don't know what your experience with grief is, but it is a random affair, right? Like
Mm.
it is nothing predictable about it. The strangest things will activate you, things that might have not even had anything to do with your parents or whatever it is. Like that's what happened to me. And so I like at one point in time I went through the it was a moment of like the first, I remember that was like the first week or so after he passed away. I remember going through a moment in the, or no, it's the second week. That's right. It was the airport. It's the last time I came around is one of the pieces there. I wrote that piece I want to say maybe a year before the book was published. So
Mm.
even though like, and that's like 6 years after his passing, right? Or 7 years after his passing. But I remember I wrote that piece and I was like, right. I remember like I even went back and like looked at my notebooks and stuff, right? I was like, right, there was that little girl who was like smiling at me even though I was bawling my eyes at and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? Like it was so yeah, it was definitely put into chronological order to fit the travelogue idea, but it
Hmm.
wasn't some of that stuff was discovered long after the fact. I'll say that. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to take a quick side trip here. That you mentioned that you had your notebook. That as a writer, do you just always have that notebook ready to go, or do you use like the notes feature on your phone just to jot something down, and then later on in the day you can refer back to it and say, oh, I really like this, and then you can tinker with it a little bit, or do you just kind of think, okay, I'm just going to write it and I'm just going to let it simmer for a while?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Is it's right. So like always a notebook. Like if I have always a notebook handy, but also like sometimes you're driving and you're at a stoplight and something comes to you and you're like, oh shit, and I'll record a voice note.
Sure.
Or if even if my kid is nearby, I'll like huck the phone back to them and be like, can you write this down in the notes app? And then they'll do that. And so yeah, like I mean, I learned pretty early on, like that idea, like, oh, this idea is so good, I'm going to remember it is nonsense. You are lying to
Hmm.
yourself. You will not remember that. So just write it down first chance you get.
Exactly. I was going to say, and you're not a true writer unless you have that stack of notebooks just waiting to be used that you'll probably never ever get to, but you got to have them
Yes.
just in case.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask you that so each poem, it almost serves like a double purpose, that it's your experience at the time, as you referred to, but also the recounting of events and the emotional impact that
Mhm.
those events had on you. Now, is that just part of your usual approach to writing, or is that just it just is more suited to what these poems were about?
Think it was more suited to what these poems were about. Like the stuff I've written since then is vastly different, drastically different, right?
Mhm.
And which was even a surprise to me, to be honest. But with this one, I felt, especially through the iterative process, like the actual editing process of it, I felt that the more I would work on a piece, the more I would unpack that personal side of it with a little bit more clarity than before, and then the more and as funny as that sounds too, the more I would fill the poem, the easier it would be to cut lines actually from it,
Hmm.
right? That were less useful or that were actually pulling focus at the time, right, or whatever it was. And so yeah, it was the actual like the craft part of it, right? Like the iterative process of it, I definitely found like layering more of myself into it, not necessarily because I wanted to, more because I was like, oh, this serves in this moment, right? Like
Hmm.
to add a little bit of a detail, a human detail that can ground somebody's experience in it. Because I mean, as you say, so much of poetry is so hard to snatch, like so hard to grab onto, when you're reading it. And so if I could give a handle to anybody who's reading this to be able to see themselves in the experience, I'll try to do that through my own, right? So
No, no, I totally get that. Is there a method that you have for putting a poem together? I mean, does it depend on what the poem's about, or maybe even like how you're feeling about the material? Is it about the emotion, or is it the message you're trying to convey? I mean, or is it just every time you start a new one, you're totally starting from square one. It's like, okay, that last one I wrote was very serious and very melancholy, and this one I'm feeling really silly. I'm going to write something that's
mm,
just really, way out there, very surreal even.
that's it's funny you say that. My two favorite pieces from the collection don't exist in that book because
Wow.
they were like wacky and strange and rhyming, meandering conversations with death, effectively, like with the character that I made, death, at a nightclub where jazz was playing, right? And it's my two favorite pieces. They used to bookend the book itself, and they are not in that book. They got cut, which was like heartbreaking for me. Um,
Why did they cut? Did they just feel it wasn't in the same tone as the rest of the material, or they just felt, this is not,
yeah,
this doesn't work, these don't mesh with the others.
it was kind of it was that, and it was a lot of like going back and forth with my wife actually, and one of the here's my struggle with the poetry world. So this is my like controversial opinion about the poetry world right now, is most of the like absolutely excellent poetry that I love out in the world is so close, so adjacent to song lyrics and rhyming, not like in a posy way, like rhyming in a way like Leonard Cohen is actually a really good example of this, right? The simplicity of a rhyme that somehow feels like it's not rhyming even while it's rhyming, and it's got so much meaning and impact and depth to it. But a lot of that is looked down upon in the poetry space, like the rhyming stuff. Unless you are an extraordinary rapper or you're a spoken word artist, a lot of that stuff is looked down upon. And I love writing that stuff. And so, but it was one of those things where I was like, okay, like, does it fit with the shape of the book now? And was the content of the piece itself another part of me like trying to show instead of letting people see? And the end result was yes, but it was a tough one. It was a hard conversation. Um, but to answer the question though about like how it starts, like I would love to have a beautiful answer about a lightning bolt from God. But the truth of the matter is sometimes I know I want to write. Like a long time ago I was like, just put your ass in the chair, do the work. And
Hmm.
so I'll just sit down and I'll write a line, and then I'll write another line, and they might not have anything to do with themselves, and I will kick out a first draft of something with really nothing in my head. And then later on, when I go back, especially with poetry, later on when I go back, then I'll start to be like, okay, was this trying to say something? And if I can't find through a couple of drafts it trying to say something, then I'll be like, okay, no. right? But if I look at it and then all of a sudden I'm sparked to write around what was written there before, or like to edit or change a line, then I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here, and I can go look through it that way. So that's the usual approach. Every now and again, though, there is those like lightning in a bottle moments where you're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, this arrives fully formed. I can do this," and then I can walk away. But that mostly happens with the rhyming stuff, not with not with the other
Okay.
things. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I was gonna say, so like if you write something and then maybe you put it aside and you say, I'm gonna put this aside, I'm gonna come back to it, a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Do you ever sit down and read something that, what was I thinking? Or, like
Oh my
I
God,
don't
yes.
even like I don't even remember writing this. Like, where did this one come from?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like, and also times too where I was like, was I okay that day? Like, it's like that kind of stuff. Like, what was this dude's problem? Yeah, no, all the time. There's like so much. There's a lot of discarded stuff. Like for every, what is it, one poem you see in that book, there was probably five or six that were cut, maybe seven.
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna say you said like you originally had like something like 140 poems,
mhm.
and now it's down to like 23. So
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
quite a drastic reduction. I want to go back to we were talking earlier about how like sometimes writing is a kind of like a therapy, a catharsis for
Hmm.
dealing with traumatic experiences. Uh, have you heard from people who have read the poems in Everything That Is, and they say, I totally relate to what you're saying. I went through the same kind of thing when my parents, when my mom died, when my dad died, or when my sibling died, or something like that. Uh, do people kind of see like it's nice to know that they're not alone, that someone else is expressing their grief, and it kind of encapsulates the way that they're feeling as well?
Yeah, I've been very, very, very grateful to get actually a lot of that. Whether it's like a DM or even people who know me, like good friends and stuff. Um, my favorite part of that actually is like here's a perfect example. I was asked like when the book was released, my friends were like, oh, we should have a party for you. And I had this weird response where I was like, I kind of didn't care that the book had been released, and
Hmm.
I'll explain that a little bit, which is. Um, it's like what mattered to me, and I didn't know this until I started getting these messages from people. What started to matter to me was realizing that the book itself was doing something for people. Because it's like it's not really about me anymore, right? Like this book is now out there doing its thing. Like I can't be in the room and argue for my work or like try to make excuses for why that pisses you off. I'm sorry. Like I can't do that, right? I'm not going to be there for it. It's the book having to speak for itself now. And when I found like the coolest part is when people are underlining lines and showing them to you and what they see in it, like it's there for sure, it's there, but you didn't see it in there when you wrote it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like they're like finding something in there, and they're like, oh yeah, like this was like the simplest one was somebody talking about. There's a piece in there where I talk about sitting on my living room floor, like the floor that I grew up on as a kid, and there were so many people who was like, oh yeah, I did that. Like as an adult who lost a parent, lost a sibling, lost even a child was one of them, right?
Hmm.
And what's also cool too, I think, is the people who will share their stories of grief with you. Like now that they know, like, oh, you get it. Like you're like this is a safe space. And so, like to hear a very dear friend of mine who told me that out of nowhere, like I didn't know any of this, but she read the book and then she was like, yeah, I had seven miscarriages, right? I was like what?
Wow.
And then we had this wonderful conversation about that, and where she has seven ornaments on her Christmas tree that she puts up every single year, and so it's just those kinds of things where you start to like learn about people because the book is doing something. Like
Hmm.
that's that meaningful stuff. And it also means like, okay, good. Like whatever I was going through is worth something now to somebody. Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned that like your friends wanted to throw a party, like, "Hey, your book's out, congratulations!"
Yeah.
And the thing is that you said it's not really about you, even though you could kind of call it autobiographical poetry, but
Mhm.
it's more like you're the character, but it's not you specific. That it's
Yeah.
about this person who lost their father and the experiences they're going through and all of this the stages of grief and all of the things that they have to go through. You talk about like transporting his ashes to Switzerland, I believe, to take it
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and it's almost like it's not that it's fictional, but it's like you are writing about this other person who just happens to be named Miguel Eichelberger, and
Yeah.
these are the things that they experience. So it's almost like a disconnect that it's
Yeah.
about me, but it's not about me.
Yeah. I think it's a really good way. You want to know how I made it more comfortable for me when my friends threw the party for me? It was like a small gathering, like 12 people, I think maybe 10 or 12 people in my friend's apartment. And like they asked me questions about the book, like we're doing right now. And I did a little bit of a reading. And then I made all of them sign my copy. That's how I made it comfortable for me.
Hmm.
I was like, if there's a spot in here that like something moved you, sign it there and point it out to me, right? That kind of thing. And that made me feel good about it
Now, I was going
instead.
to
So
say, and
yeah.
what was the reaction to that? How did people take that?
Confusion and discomfort at first,
Mm.
but then they landed in it, and then it's like some of those beautiful messages and notes I've gotten about the book, like more valuable than any reviewer, more valuable than anything, like somebody like underlining something and like sharing that, or even coming up to me and being like, "I signed it. I couldn't write about it because I was going to cry, and so I'm
Oh,
going to tell
wow.
you instead what was the thing, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was worth something," because again, it tells me the book is doing something, and yeah, like don't make it about me.
Okay, sure, sure. I was going to say you just alluded to this a little bit. I'm curious about reactions to the book from, I guess, the general reading public. You said you've gotten a lot of messages from people. I can totally relate to this. I went through the same kind of thing. Did anything like really resonate? Or actually, I guess the question is, did any of the poems really resonate with readers? Like, have you gotten like the most comments about like this one poem in particular?
Ooh, that's a really good question because it's actually well spaced. I would say there's lines that are
Mm,
more common rather than pieces themselves. So, like one of them is the really short piece, the self-talk at the wake. Like that one, I think it's 3 lines, the whole piece itself. And
hmm.
that one, like there's like almost to a person. And this even included when I was submitting it in the first place, around like to a person. Editors, everybody was like this right here, like that means something. And then the other one, the one actually that I mentioned about the airport, like coming back through the airport, it wasn't the airport part of it. It's the like you returning back to that. It's the whole like Frodo coming back and realizing he can't live in the Shire anymore, right? Like
Mm.
he's like I gotta take the boats. I gotta go. It's because yeah, when you come back from that, there's kind of an emotional distance between you and anybody who hasn't quite gone through it yet, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people have talked about that, about feeling, even in their own families. Like that was probably the most interesting thing. The people who are like, the people who've done the work, who've gone through the really interrogated themselves and all their grief and done that, versus members of their own family who kind of numbed out instead, right? Where they're like, I'm going to set that aside. I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to keep doing the work. Nothing wrong with either one of those, but those people talk about like, I know what that
Hmm.
that thing is, that feeling where I'm like, oh, like we're on the same path, but I'm like a few kilometers ahead of you now, and so that was a really cool one that I didn't expect, because that I didn't know that was there. And then they pointed it out. I was like, oh yeah, that's there. Like when you come back from something like this, especially if you come back to a positive place, like the thing I get that I say all the time about this, which is, um, I actually ended up loving grief.
Mm.
Loss can go to hell, but the grief part of it itself has taught me more about what's of value, and where the power is in it. I think, the humanity in it. That like trying to tell people like that's the phrase I always use, is what a privilege it is to have loved somebody or something this much that it hurts this bad when they're gone,
Hmm.
right? Like what a privilege, like getting to that place. That's the one when somebody comes up to me and like talks about that, like that idea, that concept, even if it's not in the same words. I was like, okay, cool, you get it. Yeah, that's the good stuff.
I was gonna say, and also you mentioned earlier about like you would write something and maybe it'd be a first draft of a poem and you'd go back and work it and work it. That one of the things I noticed throughout is that there are sometimes I would read something and think, what a fantastic choice of words. Like this one,
Mm.
rummaging through old boxes, it starts, is like gathering to a barker at the afterlife bazaar. And I'm sure that you
Mm.
just didn't think, I'm just gonna, just to jot that one down, and it was immediate. I mean, it sounds like that was something that you kind of had to self workshop a little bit.
Yeah, that's I actually liked that, because I remember, like, we'd all do that thing, right, where we go back to the house, or a house or a storage locker, whatever it is, that we have to clean out now that that person is there. And it was that idea, like looking through all these old boxes, and especially a man like my father, whose history is wild by anybody's measure, but not to him. Like to him, it's Tuesday, right? And
Sure.
like the and so like seeing the photos of him when he was in South Africa, and seeing the photos of him when he was in the military, and seeing the photos of him when he was like all this kind of stuff, and remembering the stories he told me that went with each one of these things. And all I could think about was like, we need to set these up for like, whether it's the photos or it's not the photos, but what like the possessions on the farm and stuff, like, oh, these need to go to auction, or
Mm,
these need to be sold. And I was like, I have to hawk this. I have to go out and hawk somebody's life. You know what I mean? And I was like,
sure.
that's messed up. But it took me a long time to get to that on that one. Like the idea was there from the beginning, but it was a long time before it became something I think that like made any kind of sense, if that makes sense.
Oh
So
no, no,
yeah.
it totally does. I was going to say, does that leads to the question, is it a challenge for you? Is it almost like a struggle to find the perfect word or phrase to sum up what you're trying to convey in the poem, like in terms of messaging or emotion? Did you do just kind of like you like have like a blank, like an underlined blank space, like insert perfect word here type of scenario?
That's funny. I'm okay. So this is a writing exercise I do where I force myself to put a word in there, and then whenever, and I don't flag it either, just in case the next time, the next version of me who comes back to edit it, disagrees,
Hmm,
right? But instead, it's funny, like with things like that, you can go back through the, I don't know, 20 drafts, 30 drafts of this thing,
sure.
and you can go back and you can see oh, I tried, Carnival Barker at this point, and then I erased it, and then there's like five different iterations with other words, and then in like the 20th draft or something like that, it's like, oh, we're back to Carnival Barker, and I don't even know if that Miguel spoke to that Miguel. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. So
But
yeah,
I guess
it's
that's kind of like, trust your gut instinct. Like sometimes your first thought is the best one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think there was a moment during the process of this book where I will admit to almost an obscene frustration, because like pieces from the book were getting published in magazines and stuff,
Hmm.
but the book itself was never getting over the line. And I think that frustration might have actually got in sometimes when it came to the editing process, where I would be like, you know what, maybe this is the problem, right? And I would try to like ascribe some kind of like fixable thing to it, and then I would make that fix, except it wasn't a fix because I obviously landed back on it again, like whatever it was, right? And it's anything, eventually, like you can only be so strong for so long as a writer before somebody's, well, bullshit can get in and like put a dent in your armor and
Hmm.
forget about that initial idea that you had, that initial idea that was probably the best idea. And then yeah, it just takes getting back to yourself somehow eventually.
Okay. So yeah, we have been talking with Miguel Eichelberger and his collection of poems. Everything is. So Miguel. So okay. So this book is out now.
Mm,
So what's next? I mean, you also said that when you focus on poetry, but and you also we said you have a screenplay option. So it sounds like you're not limited to poetry. You do
mm.
a whole spectrum of types of writing. What's next for you? I mean, like more poems? Or you're going to start doing some kind of fictional work?
Yeah. So like I said, my first love was fiction. So I got back into that, I want to say about 5 years ago, and I had my first short story published in Rappahannock. And so I've decided over the last little bit to write a few short stories, mess around with that, and then like kind of warm up that muscle and then point at a novel. I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to take a play that I wrote from a while ago, and I'm going to turn that into a novel, which is going to be really difficult. And I have written a new poetry collection that's like very different from this one, in terms of it's a full on, like, I'm going to write from this point of view, and I'm going to make it an actual story with a big arc, taking some, well, I'll be honest, like taking the piss out of a few of our most cherished myths as society. And I finished that one. I think it was almost a year ago, something like that, and it's out on submission now. And so I'll see if that lands anywhere. But the fiction thing, I mean, I know it was my first love. The moment I sat back
Mhm.
down and wrote a short story again, I was like, oh right, like this is this is the place.
I was going to say, are there any genres or uh, any areas that you've never tried before, but you want to take a stab at it. Like, I've had fiction writers say like and I said, do you want to write like a bodice ripper type of romance, or do you want to write like a science fiction novel? I mean, do you fall into that any of, well, not necessarily those two specific ones, but
Mhm.
do you like I always wanted to try writing, fill in the blank.
Yes, I want to write a horror novel, not
Mm,
one that is like all the power in the world to an author like Nick Cutter, but like I read The Troop and it's the grossest book I've ever read in my life. Like well written, beautifully written, absolutely disgusting. I was like, I want to write one that that is a horror book that also it also does something beautiful. Like I think a really good example might actually be like The Road by Cormac McCarthy,
mm,
where like it's. I mean, I know it's a sci-fi, right? It's a
yeah.
speculative fiction, right? But there is something like horrific at almost every single turn in that book,
Yep.
and it's like arresting, and it will not let you go from front to back, and it's also somehow beautiful. And I'm like, how are you doing
Mm.
this? So I'd like to do something in that space.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting. You said Cormac McCarthy because I think it was yesterday. I was thinking the one book I keep hearing great things about, but I don't think I could ever bring myself to read is Blood Meridian, just because it's so gory and it just sounds
Yeah,
so. This would not be something I would enjoy. So it's
yeah.
just that's just the way that is. Miguel, before we wrap things up, I want to ask. I like to ask all the guests, like, what advice do you have for writers out there? I mean, it could be about poetry. It could just be writing in general. I mean, some key pieces of advice that maybe have really worked effectively for you and that you think would be really helpful to pass along to other writers.
Yeah, this will sound kind of banal at the beginning, but then I'll land on why it's important. So it's write everything. Write everything. Even the like I said, like mess around on all the genres, do everything. Even if you were talking about, like that cringe poetry when you're a teenager, right? Like go back, look at that shit, write it again. And the reason why is I think, at least it's been my experience that the more I do that, and even when I do it in the corporate space, when I'm like, writing corporate communications and doing all that kind of stuff, it makes you so much better at what you do. It makes it so much easier when you're trying to find that perfect word or that perfect phrasing that will describe something or connect something for you. It's just there's more to reach for in your pantry. So that's the big thing. And this is where it gets to the second thing. The most important thing is when you are receiving feedback. Once you've done it a lot, you've written your own work a lot, and you've gotten through those moments where the people you really trust who give you feedback have given you feedback. It's remember to create a feedback filter. The stuff that gets through can only be the stuff that you're like after you get over the emotional response to it, because you're human, you'll still have an emotional response. After you get over the emotional response, be like, oh, that actually makes this character fuller, or to let this moment breathe, like whatever it is, right? Like it's once it gives something, it becomes additive. It could just be somebody seeing something better than you could see yourself in the work. And then my rubric for that is always the same, which is if somebody tells you there's a clunk there, they're right. If they tell you how to fix it, they're wrong. That's it. So, yeah.
I was going to say, not the first time I've heard that
Yeah,
advice as
that's it.
well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have been talking with Miguel Eichelberger. His book of poems is Everything Is. Miguel, this has been a fascinating and really enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's my genuine pleasure. Thank you.
Of course, of course. And where can people find out more about you, website and social platforms that they could find you on as well?
Yeah, check me out at migueleichelberger.com. And I'm on Instagram and Threads at Eichelbard, and Blue Sky as well. Find me there.
All right, fantastic. So it's MiguelEichelberger.com and Eichelbard on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. Miguel, again, thank you so much for being here today. Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. The theme music for our audio edition, that is by Mark Gunyon. For my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, that is MaximumZ.blog. This show is on Blue Sky and Instagram at podcastcwl, and I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram, that is at Pez Screenwriting, yeah, just like the candy. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books, all three of them on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and pie. Like I said, that's Miguel. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.